Now we have our products ready, we can start looking at how we're going to bring them together. To get a sense of what we're going for, I've brought in this example from Freepik. Notice how alignment and spacing have been used to bring order and beauty to the image. By drawing out lines, we can see the image is firstly bound by the outside edges of the products, creating a readable rectangular shape. This can then be further broken down into 3 rectangles before we finally see the rest of the objects lining up. For objects which don't fully line up because of size, we can see center alignment or edge alignment still being used. These invisible guides and rules help to create order and are what we're going to be using with our design. The second thing to notice is the spacing. Again, the creator has kept this pretty consistent between each of the objects. Giving the product space to breathe is therefore also important, and trying to get the sizes the same will also create a pleasing image. Now let's apply this to our mock-up. In Photoshop, I've got my product files open, and I'm going to create a new file to work in and drag everything in. I'm going to make it a size of 5000 by 5000 pixels with 300 dpi, and then click OK. And I'm going to give it a light pastel colour. In my case, I'm going to use a greyish orange to contrast with my blue design. Next, I'm going to open my object files and drag them in one by one. I'm using the Auto Select tool in this case, with group switched on, since this is a really fast way of selecting and moving layers in Photoshop without getting into the Layers panel. Just select your Move tool, click on a group, and you'll see you're able to move your objects around. Starting with my iPad, however, you'll notice my layers don't move as one. To get around this, I'm going to group them together by highlighting them both and hitting Ctrl-G on my keyboard. Then I'll drag it onto my new file. And I'll do the same with my other files which shouldn't need grouping. Because we use numerous files for our project, you'll notice the scales vary across the objects. I'm happy with the ratio of my iPad to smartphone, but I want to adjust my business card, so I'll select them both, and using Free Transform, I'll scale them to be the same width as the phone. Then I'll select everything and scale them down till they sit better on my canvas. When I'm happy with that, I'll press Enter and then group them together. I do this so we can now align them to our background and thus our canvas. I do this by using Align tools up here. Now I'm ready to begin laying out my design. Since my iPad is the largest object, I have a chance to use it to line up my other objects. I like asymmetry in my work, so I'm going to leave it aligned to the left. I've got my rulers on, so I can use these to line up my objects as well if I like. Mainly though, I'm just using my eyes to judge my space and alignment. Just to talk you through my process in these moments, I'm just experimenting with the more obvious layouts first, without doing much to transform what we have in front of us. For me, that means starting with lining everything on this bottom edge and sticking to this height and size order already brought about by the proportions of our 3 object types. I've chosen to do this since I don't see much opportunity to create a shape like a rectangle with the objects as they are. I've then tried my other edge and axes to try and get something which feels right and comfortable. In the end, for my first layout, I've gone for something which works mainly along the central horizontal axis and then lines up everything almost in size order as we had it. I'm going to crop my work, and then I'm going to align it, and I'm going to save this as one option before I move on to another. What I recommend is making 3 or 5 different versions of your mockup to make sure you've gone through different iterations and experiments. And just as a tip, when I'm saving these images as JPEGs to save time and memory, I'm using Save for Web and changing my resolution to a low value. Moving on to my next design, I'm going to experiment with playing with the length of the business cards, more to try and go for the rectangle shape around the outside, which we didn't get before. To achieve this, I'm going to need to fill in this uncomfortable bit of negative space here, so I'm going to break a rule and bring in overlapping. Don't forget, if you decide to overlap your objects, to have thinner items below. If my iPhone is below the image, it looks a bit contrived and unnatural, so it's probably something you'll notice just from looking anyway, but it's good to remember. For my third option, I've decided to experiment with creating a vertical composition. Again, I ended up with some uncomfortable negative space. To get around this, I've brought in text and decided to overlay my icon as well. Don't forget that your mock-up is at the end of the day an advertising or selling tool. In selling your idea, it can't harm you to work in and bring in familiar elements like text and illustrations when they relate to your story. My final option is based on my second design, where I included an overlap. I still felt there was some awkward negative space, so using the trick from my third option, I've brought in my logo and placed it in an empty bottom square. When you're laying out your objects, play around as much as possible. A good way to start is to create a conventional, no-touching ordered layout first, and then after analysing what could be improved, play with and start to introduce little tweaks and have a go at breaking some of the rules we set out at the beginning.